Doctor develops robotic leg for poor disabled girl and shocks community. Dr. Michael Harrison watched his hands tremble as he tried to hold the cup of coffee in the small kitchen of Mercy Medical Center. 6 months had passed since he abandoned his brilliant career as an orthopedic surgeon at Boston Medical Center after being diagnosed with progressive essential tremor. The condition, which initially seemed manageable, now threatened not only his profession, but his very identity. That same morning, Nurse Jennifer rushed into the exam room where Michael was organizing his files. "Doctor, we have an emergency. A 7-year-old girl, a household accident, severe damage to her left leg." When he entered the treatment room, Michael was met with a frightened child, her curly hair tied in pigtails, and a grandmother whose face was worn by time and worry. The girl, Emily, had fallen from a makeshift ladder in the humble home where she lived in Millbrook, the small upstate New York town where Michael had moved seeking anonymity and peace. "Mrs. Martha, Emily's situation is delicate," Michael explained in the waiting room hours later while the girl slept under sedation. "The compound fracture damaged major nerves and arteries. We did what we could here, but—" "Just say it, Doc. I've been through a lot in my life," replied the 67-year-old woman, clutching her rosary between her fingers. "Her leg will need to be partially amputated. We don't have the resources here for complex reconstructive surgery, and even if we did—" Michael hesitated, involuntarily glancing at his trembling hands. The news struck Mrs. Martha like lightning. She'd been raising her granddaughter alone ever since her daughter left to work as a cleaning lady in Chicago. "And after, Doc, what will her life be like?" "She'll need a prosthesis," Michael explained, his throat tightening, "but Medicaid has a waiting list, and—" He stopped when he saw the grandmother's silent tears. "With my retirement check, I can barely afford medicine and food, Doc." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Images of Emily mixed with memories of his own interrupted career. He had been one of New York's top surgeons, a pioneer in minimally invasive techniques, until the tremors started, first subtle, then undeniable. He remembered the humiliation of dropping instruments during surgery, the pitying looks from colleagues, the friendly suggestion from his boss to consider early retirement. The next morning, when he visited Emily, he found her awake, silently, staring at the ceiling. "Grandma said they're taking part of my leg," she said bluntly as Michael approached. "Yes," he replied, choosing honesty, "but you'll get a new leg afterward, a special one." The girl's eyes lit up for a moment. "Like Jessica Miller's, that swimmer I saw on TV." Michael smiled. "Something like that." But his smile faded when he thought about the cost of such a prosthesis. Over the following weeks, as Emily recovered from the amputation, Michael began visiting her daily. Something about the girl's determination, her insistence on trying to stand up despite medical advice, touched the surgeon deeply. One afternoon, watching her frustrated attempts to reach a glass of water on the bedside table, Michael made a decision. That night, he turned his small apartment into a makeshift studio. He dug out biomedical engineering books he'd collected out of curiosity, spread sketches across the table, and began designing. His hands shook as he tried to draw precise lines, forcing him to start over dozens of times. But the image of Emily, struggling to stand on her own, gave him the strength to keep going. Michael knew that with the resources available in Millbrook, it would be impossible to create anything like the cutting-edge prosthetics he used to prescribe in New York. But he also knew that with creativity and dedication, he could develop something functional to restore Emily's mobility. A week later, during his daily visit to the hospital, Michael found Emily silently crying in her bed. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, sitting beside her. "The other kids will laugh at me at school," she replied between sobs. "I'll be the one-legged girl." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. "No, you won't," Michael said firmly. "You'll be the girl with the coolest leg in school. I have a project for you." Without revealing details, Michael showed Emily some rough sketches, letting her imagine walking, running, and even dancing again. The sparkle in her eyes fueled him, and he spent every night working on the project. However, the director of Mercy Medical Center, Dr. David Thompson, didn't share his enthusiasm. "Michael, have you lost your mind?" he asked when the doctor mentioned his plan to develop a homemade prosthetic. "We're a small-town clinic. We barely have resources for antibiotics. And with all due respect, you can't even operate anymore because of your tremors. How do you expect to build a prosthetic?" "I don't need to operate to build, David. I need to think, to design. And risk the clinic's reputation when this hack job fails? No way. Focus on the patients you can help within our limits." Frustrated, Michael turned to Mrs. Martha, who had rented a small room near the hospital, to stay close to her granddaughter during recovery. Under the dim light of a bare bulb, he explained his idea. The old woman eyed him skeptically. "Why are you doing this, Doc? No one does anything for free these days." The question caught Michael off guard. "Maybe I need Emily as much as she needs me," he answered honestly. "Doctors break too, Mrs. Martha, and sometimes we need something bigger than ourselves to fix us." Her suspicion didn't vanish completely, but she allowed Michael to start physical therapy exercises with Emily while the girl was still in the hospital. They were simple movements disguised as games, but they'd strengthen the muscles needed for the future prosthetic. "Do you have children, Doc?" Mrs. Martha asked one afternoon, watching Michael teach Emily a new exercise. "No," he replied. "Never had the time. Medicine was always my life. And now I'm learning there are other kinds of lives." The project progressed slowly. Michael improvised with available materials, PVC pipes, basic mechanical parts from hardware stores, plaster molds. His nights were long, interrupted by constant frustration when his tremors prevented him from doing precise work. It was on one of those frustrating nights that Nurse Jennifer surprised him at his apartment, bringing documents he'd forgotten at the clinic. Seeing the sketches and prototypes scattered around, she gasped. "Are you trying to build a prosthetic for Emily?" Michael tried to hide the drawings, afraid she'd report him to the hospital board. "It's just a personal project. You know this goes against all protocols, right? Using unapproved equipment on patients?" "I'm not using anything on her yet. They're just ideas." Jennifer studied the sketches and the rudimentary prototype carefully. "My brother's an electronics technician. He could help with the electrical parts," she said, surprising Michael. "I lost my niece to a rare disease because we couldn't access treatment. I know what it's like to watch someone suffer from lack of resources." That's how an unlikely partnership began. Jennifer brought her brother, Robert, who became fascinated with the project. "I can adapt motors from discarded printers to create movement," he suggested, examining the sketches. "It won't be as powerful as imported models, but for a child her size, it might work." The small group worked in secret, each contributing what they could. Michael designed, Robert developed the electronic components, and Jennifer handled logistics, sourcing materials, and making excuses for their frequent meetings. Meanwhile, Emily was discharged from the hospital, returning to the small house she shared with her grandmother. The adjustment was hard. The house had steps, the bathroom was narrow, and the borrowed wheelchair barely fit through the doors. Michael started visiting her regularly, always bringing new exercises disguised as games. "Doctor, don't you have anything better to do?" Mrs. Martha once asked, suspicious of his frequent visits. "I have plenty to do, Mrs. Martha, but nothing as important as this." Emily's determination amazed everyone. Even on days of intense pain, she insisted on completing her exercises. "I want to dance at the school dance," she'd say, whenever someone suggested she rest. "You will dance," Michael promised, growing more committed to his secret project. Yet the challenges were immense. The first prototype failed completely. It was too heavy for a child. The second caused skin irritation. The third broke after a few steps. And with each failure, Michael's tremor worsened, fueled by stress and anxiety. One night, after a particularly frustrating day when the fourth prototype failed during testing, Michael broke down. He threw tools against the wall, cried like he hadn't since he was a teenager, and finally admitted aloud, "I can't help her. I can't help anyone. I'm too broken." It was Jennifer who found him like that, bringing a new component Robert had managed to source. Without a word, she sat beside him on the apartment floor. When my niece got sick, she began after a long silence. We saw dozens of doctors. None gave us hope, but there was one who tried, even knowing the odds were slim. He failed. She passed. But that attempt meant everything to our family. What if I'm just giving false hope? What if I'm only trying to prove something to myself using that little girl? There's no such thing as false hope, Michael. There's only hope. And if you're trying to prove something to yourself, so be it. What matters is that you're trying. That night, instead of working on the prototype, Michael revisited all his orthopedic knowledge. He re-examined the biomechanics of walking, weight distribution, pressure points. The problem wasn't the lack of sophisticated technology, he realized. It was the basic design that was flawed. The next morning, with a new plan in mind, Michael went straight to the town's mechanic shop, where he met old Joe, a man with calloused hands who fixed everything from tractors to bicycles. "Do you understand mechanical joints?" Michael asked. "A joint is a joint, Doc, whether it's for people or machines. Everything needs smooth movement and firm support." With old Joe's help, a new prototype began to take shape, simpler, lighter, using basic mechanical principles instead of complex tech. The parts came from discarded bikes, broken appliances, and community donations as whispers spread about the secret project of the New York doctor. Emily turned 8 while the prototype was being finished. At her small party, held in the backyard with a simple cake and soda, the girl made just one wish as she blew out the candles. "I want to walk at my 9th birthday party." The words tugged at Michael's heart, as he still didn't have a deadline for finishing the prosthesis. His tremors were getting worse, now even affecting his speech during moments of stress. The new director of the clinic, Dr. Richard Wilson, had noticed his condition worsening and began questioning Michael's ability to treat patients. "We need to have a serious talk," Richard said, calling Michael into his office after a patient complained about the doctor struggling to hold a medical chart. "You've been a good professional, but your condition is affecting your work." "I've been taking my medication regularly," Michael defended himself, "and clearly it's not working. I'm considering reassigning your patients. Please, I need this job." The humiliation of begging was only slightly less than the desperation of losing the paycheck that funded the prosthesis project. "Then I suggest you seek specialized help again. There are more advanced treatments available in New York." Michael knew that. He also knew they were expensive treatments, ones that would force him to abandon Emily's project to focus on himself. The choice felt impossible. That afternoon, when he visited Emily for another exercise session, he found the girl coloring on the living room floor. "What are you up to, kiddo?" he asked, sitting down with difficulty beside her. "Drawing my new leg," she replied, showing him a colorful sketch of a robotic leg covered in lights and buttons, replacing the missing one. "It's gonna have a button for running, a button for dancing, and a secret button for flying when no one's looking." Michael smiled, caught between tenderness and guilt. "Magic legs don't exist, Em. I'm trying to make a special leg for you, but it won't have flying buttons." "I know, Doc, it's just imagination. Grandma says imagination is what keeps us going when things are hard." That childlike simplicity struck Michael deeply. While he wrestled with real limitations, scarce resources, a degenerative condition, professional disapproval, Emily faced her own battle with the one weapon she had: imagination. That night, while working on the prototype, Michael had an idea. What if, instead of trying to hide his tremors during precision work, he incorporated them into the design? He began developing an assisted dampening system, a series of small springs and counterweights that would compensate for involuntary movements, allowing for greater precision. Weeks of trial and error followed. Money was running low, and Michael started selling personal belongings to fund the project. His car, a relic from his life in New York, was traded for a used motorcycle. His expensive medical books were sold online. Anything non-essential became currency for buying components. The clinic's director, Dr. Richard, eventually discovered the project. A patient, seeing the sketches in Michael's office, mentioned it to another doctor, who passed the information along. A summons to an emergency meeting with the administrative board was inevitable. "Are you developing medical equipment without Authorization? Using your position at this institution to test unapproved devices on a child? The outrage was clear in the administrative director's voice. I'm not testing anything yet. I'm just developing a prototype. With what qualifications? Are you a biomedical engineer now? I've worked with dozens of prosthetics throughout my career. I understand the principles. Understanding principles doesn't qualify you to manufacture medical devices, doctor. There are regulations, safety protocols, necessary clinical trials, regulations that make these technologies inaccessible for families like Emily's. Michael raised his voice, a rare occurrence for his controlled temperament. Do you know how much a quality prosthetic costs? How long it would take for her to get one through Medicaid if she even could? Dr. Richard intervened calmly. Michael, we understand your concern for the patient. It's admirable, but you're risking your career and potentially the girl's safety too. If something goes wrong, who takes responsibility? I will. I just need more time. The board's decision was unanimous. Michael must immediately abandon his unauthorized project or be dismissed from the clinic. Additionally, the case would be reported to the medical board for ethical review. Defeated, Michael rode his motorcycle to Emily's house that afternoon. He needed to explain to the girl and her grandmother that he couldn't keep his promise. The scene he encountered broke his heart. Emily was in the backyard, leaning on makeshift crutches, trying to do the exercises he had taught her, while tears of pain streamed down her face. Why are you doing this, Em? It's not time for your exercises. Because if I get stronger faster, you'll finish my leg sooner, right? Michael felt as if an invisible hand were squeezing his chest. How could he tell a child that the adults responsible for helping her cared more about regulations than her well-being? Em, we need to talk. The leg project, it's going to take longer than I thought. The girl's eyes widened. How long? Until my 9th birthday? Probably longer, he replied, unable to meet her gaze. There are rules about these things. Important people say I can't do this without special permissions. But you're a doctor. Can't doctors make new legs? It's not that simple. Mrs. Martha, who had been watching from the kitchen door, stepped forward. I knew it would end like this. Too many dreams for folks like us. I haven't given up, Michael quickly explained. I just need to find another way. There's always another way for those with money, Doc, not for us. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Mrs. Martha's words echoed in his mind, along with the image of Emily pushing through the pain. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He resigned from Mercy Medical Center. When he handed in his resignation, he faced the shock of his colleagues and the genuine concern of some, like Jennifer. What will you do? Now? The nurse asked, finding him in the parking lot. I'll finish what I started. No conflicts of interest, no compromising the clinic. How will you support yourself? Michael smiled, a tired but determined smile. I have enough savings for a few months, and I'll open a small private practice. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by while I work on the project. You're risking everything for a child you barely know. I'm risking everything for myself too, Jennifer, because if I can't operate anymore, I need to find another way to make a difference. Michael's small practice opened 2 weeks later in a rented room above Main Street Pharmacy in Millbrook. The space was simple, with second-hand furniture and basic equipment, but enough for routine care. In the back, he set up a small workshop where he continued working on the prosthetic at night. Word about the doctor who builds legs began to spread through town. Some saw Michael as a hero, others as a reckless fool. Business was slow at first, but it grew as curious residents showed up with minor complaints, often just to hear the full story. Old Joe, the mechanic, became a frequent visitor to the makeshift workshop, bringing parts and suggestions. Doc, that gear you're using won't hold up. Let me show you something I learned fixing harvesters. Old Joe's practical knowledge, combined with Michael's medical understanding and Robert's electronics skills, was creating something unique. A prosthesis that wasn't the most technologically advanced, but incorporated creative solutions born from necessity and diverse experience. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, Michael's financial situation was getting worse. His consultations barely covered the rent for his office and the workshop. His savings were running out fast, and the components for the prosthesis ate up any leftover funds. One particularly tough afternoon, after a day with no patients, Michael found Jennifer at his door. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a box of electronic components. "Robert got them from a company that was going to throw them out. I can't accept any more help, Jennifer. You've already risked too much for me." "It's not for you, it's for Emily," she corrected with a smile. "And I brought something else too." She handed him an envelope. "It's a list of patients from the clinic who asked about you. People who want to be seen here." "Why? There are better doctors at the clinic now." "Because you listen, Michael. You see the people, not just the symptoms." Jennifer's list revived his practice. Within a few weeks, Michael had a small but loyal clientele, mostly elderly patients with chronic conditions and children with minor issues. It wasn't enough for luxuries, but it kept the basic bills paid. Progress on the prosthesis sped up. The sixth prototype, incorporating a damping system to compensate for Michael's tremors, was almost ready for testing. It was a unique creation, part handcrafted, part improvised high-tech with repurposed parts from various equipment. On a rainy afternoon, Michael visited Emily to share the news. He found the girl sitting on the porch watching other children play in the street. "Hi, Doc," she greeted, without taking her eyes off the street, where some girls were playing hopscotch. "Hey, champ, how are the exercises going?" "I do them every day," she replied without enthusiasm. "But I'm tired of exercises. I want to play too." Michael sat beside her. "I've got good news. The special leg is almost ready." The girl's eyes finally turned to him, a mix of hope and fear. "Really? You're not just saying that to cheer me up?" "Really. I just need to make a few final adjustments, and then we can test it." "And will I be able to run with it and dance?" "We'll start slow with small steps. Then who knows?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Martha, returning from her job as a cleaning lady. Her tired face lit up when she saw Michael. "The doc brought news, Grandma," Emily exclaimed before Michael could greet her. "What kind of news?" Mrs. Martha asked, suspicious. "The prosthesis is almost ready," Michael explained. "In 2 weeks at most, we can do an initial test." Mrs. Martha's face didn't show the joy Michael expected. Instead, she asked to speak with him privately, while Emily turned her attention back to the children in the street. "Doc, I appreciate everything you've done, but—" Mrs. Martha hesitated, twisting the dish towel in her hands. "I don't want to get the girl's hopes up. She's already suffered so much." "I understand your concern, but I believe it will work." "And if it doesn't? You go back to your life and we stay here, with yet another disappointment." The words hit Michael like a slap. It was a legitimate fear. He had been so caught up in the technical challenge that he hadn't fully considered the emotional impact of potential failure. "Mrs. Martha, I'm not just building a prosthetic, I'm rebuilding my life too. If I fail, I won't be going back to my old life because it doesn't exist anymore. We're in this together, for better or worse." His sincerity seemed to touch the older woman, who finally nodded. 2 weeks then. But please talk to Emily about possible limitations. She's dreaming of dancing ballet." The next 2 weeks were a frenzy. Michael finalized the prototype, conducted makeshift durability tests, and made the final adjustments. The end result looked nothing like the sophisticated prosthetics he used to prescribe in New York. It was rougher, with visible screws and exposed mechanisms, but it had its own charm, like a handcrafted musical instrument. The big day arrived on a sunny Saturday morning. Michael chose to conduct the test in the small office, with only Emily, Mrs. Martha, Jennifer, Robert, and old Joe present, the people who had made it possible. "Are you ready to meet your new leg?" Michael asked, kneeling in front of Emily, who sat in a chair at the center of the room. The girl nodded, her eyes fixed on the box on the table containing the prosthetic. With careful movements, Michael opened the box and revealed his creation. It wasn't black and grey like most modern prosthetics, but colorful. Robert had suggested painting the external components in Emily's favorite colors, purple and yellow. The result vaguely resembled the colors of a basketball team she admired. "It's different from what I imagined," Emily said, studying it curiously. "It's one of a kind made just for you," Michael explained. "Shall we try it on?" The fitting process was slow and meticulous. Michael explained each step, each adjustment, every sensation Emily should expect. The socket had been precisely molded, from plaster casts taken weeks earlier. "Does it feel tight?" he asked once he finished fastening the security straps. "A little, but it doesn't hurt," Emily replied, curiously touching the metal components. "Now, let's try standing. I'll support you. Don't be afraid." Carefully, Michael helped Emily rise, bearing most of her weight. The first moments were tense. The prosthetic creaked slightly under the adjustment, and Emily gripped the doctor's arms tightly. "It's okay, I've got you," Michael assured her, feeling his own tremors worsen with the tension. Slowly, he shifted more weight onto Emily's legs until she was standing almost unaided, needing only slight support for balance. The prosthetic was working. "I'm standing!" Emily exclaimed, a huge smile lighting up her face. Mrs. Martha brought her hands to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Jennifer and Robert exchanged looks of disbelief. Old Joe let out a low whistle, impressed. "Now let's try a small step," Michael instructed. "Just lift your natural leg, move it a little forward and plant it. The prosthetic will stay in place, supporting you." Emily obeyed, taking one small step, then another and another. With each successful step, her confidence visibly grew. "Doctor, I'm walking. I'm really walking." The magical moment was interrupted by a sharp knock on the office door. Before anyone could react, the door swung open, revealing Dr. Richard Wilson accompanied by two men in suits. "Dr. Michael Harrison?" one of the men asked formally. "I'm Dr. William Grant from the medical board. We're here for an emergency inspection based on reports of irregular medical practice." Michael Harrison's blood ran cold. Behind him, Emily was still standing, supported by her new prosthetic, frozen in shock at the sudden intrusion. "Do you see what he's doing?" Dr. Richard Wilson accused, pointing at Emily. "Testing unapproved medical devices on a child. That's grounds for permanent revocation of his license." The second man, who introduced himself as Dr. Jonathan Clark, also from the medical board, stepped closer to Emily with a serious expression. "Young lady, are you feeling any discomfort? Pain? Anything unusual?" Emily looked confusedly at Michael, then at her grandmother, unsure how to respond. "No one's hurting me," she finally said. "Dr. Michael made me a new leg because we can't afford a real one." Dr. Jonathan examined the prosthetic closely, his expression growing more intrigued. "Who designed this?" "I did," Michael replied, regaining his composure. "With help from these friends." "Based on what research? What safety protocols were followed?" "Based on 15 years of experience as an orthopedic surgeon and rehabilitation specialist. As for protocols," Michael hesitated, "I adapted safety procedures to the resources available." Dr. William Grant shook his head disapprovingly. "This is highly irregular, Doctor. Are you aware of the legal implications of developing and testing unapproved medical devices, especially on a child? I'm aware of the implications of doing nothing while a child loses her childhood because she can't access technology that should be everyone's right," Michael answered, his voice steady. Despite the tremors in his hands, "Doctor, I'll have to ask you to halt this experiment immediately, and we'll need to confiscate the device for analysis." "No," Emily cried, clinging to the robotic leg as if they might rip it away right then. "It's my leg. Dr. Michael made it for me." Mrs. Martha stepped forward protectively beside her granddaughter. "With all due respect, doctors, you're not taking anything from here today. If you want to talk, we'll talk. But the leg stays with my granddaughter." "Ma'am," Dr. William tried to explain patiently, "I understand your frustration, but this device hasn't been tested or approved. It could pose a risk." "A risk?" Mrs. Martha interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you know what the real risk is? It's an 8-year-old girl who can't play with other kids, who cries herself to sleep every night because she feels different, who asks why God let her fall off that ladder. That's the risk. What this doctor did was give my granddaughter hope." A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily, still standing, unaware of the gravity of the situation, took another experimental step with the prosthetic. The movement caught everyone's attention. Dr. Jonathan watched with professional interest. The damping mechanism is fascinating. I've never seen anything like it in conventional prosthetics. It was originally developed to compensate for my tremors while building it, Michael explained. I realized it could also help soften the impact while walking. Your tremors? Dr. Jonathan frowned. Michael held out his hands, revealing the tremors he'd tried to hide for so long. Progressive essential tremor. That's why I left surgery in New York. But I found I can still contribute in other ways. Something in the honesty of his confession seemed to move Dr. Jonathan, who exchanged a meaningful glance with his colleague. Dr. Richard, Dr. William addressed the clinic director, you mentioned misuse of hospital equipment, diversion of public resources. All I see here are improvised tools. Richard looked flustered. He was using the clinic's name, treating the girl as a regular patient. Not since I resigned, Michael interrupted. Everything you see here was developed with my own resources in my free time. Dr. Williams sighed deeply. Even so, there are procedures, Doctor. You can't just create medical devices in your garage. Actually, Jennifer interjected timidly, there's a Department of Health program for innovations in low-cost assistive technology. I researched it when we started the project. Everyone turned, surprised, to the nurse, who continued. The program specifically encourages the development of affordable solutions for underserved communities, with simplified protocols for initial testing, as long as they're supervised by qualified professionals. And why didn't you mention this before? Michael asked, stunned. Because we first needed a functional prototype to submit to the program, something to prove the concept works. Dr. Jonathan seemed increasingly intrigued. That program does exist, he confirmed. It was created to address the shortage of assistive technologies in rural areas. This changes things a bit, Dr. William admitted, visibly uncomfortable. Even so, we need to formalize the process, conduct proper testing, document everything. That's exactly what we intend to do, Michael assured. But we first needed to confirm the concept was viable, that we could create something functional with the resources available. Emily, tired of standing still during the long discussion, decided to demonstrate the prosthesis's functionality herself. Letting go of the support, she took 3 determined steps toward the medical board doctors. Look, I'm walking on sea. My own, she announced proudly, before slightly losing her balance and being steadied by old Joe. The moment broke the tension in the room. Dr. Jonathan couldn't help but smile. Even Dr. William, the most formal of the inspectors, seemed moved by the girl's determination. Here's what I propose, Dr. Jonathan finally said. We won't confiscate the device today, considering the emotional impact it would have on the patient. But Dr. Michael will need to submit all development documentation to the program the nurse mentioned within 30 days. Until then, the prosthesis must be supervised and limited to short periods, with monitoring for any adverse effects. And if it's not approved after submission? Mrs. Martha asked, still wary. Then we'll have to re-evaluate. But based on what I've seen today, I believe the project has merit. Dr. Richard seemed unhappy with the outcome. This is absurd. He violated every protocol, put the clinic's reputation at risk. The clinic isn't involved, Doctor. Dr. William reminded him dryly. You said yourself he no longer works there. After the medical board inspectors left, promising a preliminary report favorable to continuing the project under supervision, the small group fell silent, processing what had happened. So, they're not taking my leg. Emily broke the silence, still clutching her grandmother's hand. No, sweetheart, Michael smiled, feeling deep relief, but we need to follow some rules now. Use it just a little each day. Write down everything you feel, make adjustments as needed. Like a magic leg diary. Exactly like a magic leg diary. In the following weeks, Michael, now with official help from Jennifer and Robert, meticulously documented every aspect of the prosthesis's development. Old Joe was credited as a technical consultant, contributing his practical mechanical knowledge. The project, named Magic Leg by Emily, was submitted to the Assistive Technology Innovation Program with unexpected support from Dr. Jonathan, who was genuinely impressed by the ingenuity of the solutions found. The news about the doctor who developed a low-cost prosthetic spread through the region, at first through casual conversations, then through a small article in the local paper, and finally reaching a regional TV program that did a feature on the project. Michael's office went from being a makeshift space to becoming a small development center. Other doctors, initially skeptical, began visiting to learn about the work. Some offered partnerships. Others provided constructive criticism that helped refine the design. Emily grew more skilled with her prosthetic each day. Daily exercises strengthened her muscles, and her determination surpassed all expectations. 3 months after the first test, she wasn't just walking safely, but had started taking small runs in her backyard. "I've never seen such a quick adaptation," remarked a physical therapist monitoring her progress. "It's as if she and the prosthetic were made for each other." Mrs. Martha, who had initially been so reluctant to accept the project, became its most passionate advocate. She organized a support group for families of children with special needs in the community, using the waiting room of Michael's office for weekly meetings. "If Emily could do it, others can too," she told the mothers who arrived carrying stories of closed doors and fading hope. Michael's tremor didn't disappear, but it stabilized. The meticulous work on the prosthetic, ironically, acted as a form of therapy for his condition. The need to control fine movements during the device's development created new neural pathways, as explained by a neurologist who took interest in the case. "You've essentially created your own rehabilitation protocol, Michael," the specialist noted after detailed examinations. "It's not a cure, but it's a remarkably effective management." 6 months after the first prosthetic test, the Magic Leg project received official approval from the Innovation Program. With it came modest funding to expand development and test the concept with other patients. The first of these new patients was Jason, a 14-year-old boy who had lost part of his arm in a farming machinery accident. His family, having traveled nearly 200 miles to Millbrook after seeing the TV report, arrived with little hope, just the kind of desperation that moves mountains. "They say you work miracles," the boy's father told Michael upon meeting him. "I don't work miracles. I just refuse to accept that a lack of resources should be a final sentence." Developing the prosthetic for Jason posed different challenges. An arm requires more complex movements, greater precision, and a more sophisticated interface with the remaining muscles. Michael gathered his makeshift team, now more experienced and confident, and they got to work. Emily insisted on being part of the process. At just 9 years old, she became an unofficial ambassador for the project, frequently visiting the office to talk with Jason, sharing her experience, and encouraging him during moments of frustration. "At first it feels weird," she explained, with the peculiar wisdom of children who faced hardships early. "Like it's not part of you, but then it's like it was always there." The relationship between Michael and Jennifer, initially strictly professional, naturally evolved into something deeper. The long nights working together, the shared fight for a cause greater than themselves, created a connection neither had planned. "Never thought I'd fall for a stubborn doctor." With shaky hands, Jennifer joked one night as they worked late. "And I never thought the nurse who reported me to my superiors would become the most important person in my life," Michael replied, drawing a laugh from her. Dr. Richard Wilson, who had never fully accepted the project's success, eventually transferred to another hospital, citing incompatibility with the new administrative guidelines. His replacement, a young and enthusiastic doctor named Dr. Sarah Johnson, immediately partnered with Michael's project, offering the clinics resources for patient exams and follow-ups. "What you're doing here is exactly the kind of medicine I believe in," Sarah explained during her first visit to the office. "Accessible, compassionate, focused on people's real needs." Emily's 9th birthday party, held in the neighborhood community hall, became a milestone in the project's history. The girl who had promised herself she would dance at her own party kept that promise in front of an emotional crowd of family, friends, and community members who had followed her journey. It wasn't classical ballet as she had once dreamed, but a school dance routine rehearsed for weeks with the help of a volunteer teacher. Her movements were still limited, her coordination not perfect, but the joy on her face as she twirled, to the tune of Ring Around the Rosie, was worth more than any technical perfection. "Doctor," Mrs. Martha called, finding Michael watching his granddaughter dance with emotion, "I wanted to thank you again." "No need to thank me, Mrs. Martha. Seeing Emily like this is all the reward I could ever want." "It's not just about the leg," the older woman explained, her eyes glistening with held-back tears. "It's because you didn't give up when even I had. Sometimes we get so used to being told no that we stop dreaming, you know." Michael nodded, understanding perfectly. He too had almost stopped dreaming when the tremors began, resigning himself to the idea that his career, his identity, was irreparably damaged. "I think Emily taught all of us that," he replied. "That limits exist to be questioned." The Magic Leg project eventually evolved into the New Pathways Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to developing low-cost assistive technologies for underserved communities. With modest funding from government programs and private donations, the institute began training local technicians in various regions across the country, multiplying the impact of the original idea. Michael never returned to surgery, but found a new way to heal in designing and refining prosthetics. His hands, which had once performed delicate surgeries, now crafted and adjusted devices that restored mobility and dignity to those life had taken it from. Jennifer left Mercy Medical Center to officially join the institute, overseeing training and follow-up programs. Her deep understanding of the local reality and her natural ability to connect with patients became as valuable as Michael's technical expertise. Robert expanded his knowledge in electronics, specializing in muscle electrical interfaces that allowed for more sophisticated prosthetic control. Old Joe, despite having no formal engineering education, became a permanent technical consultant, offering practical solutions that often surpassed academically perfect but impractical ideas. The relationship between Michael and Jennifer blossomed naturally, culminating in a simple wedding in the same community hall where Emily had danced at her birthday. The girl, now 10, was the flower girl, walking proudly down the aisle with her magic leg, specially decorated for the occasion with ribbons and tiny flowers. Mrs. Martha, watching her granddaughter participate in the ceremony with such ease, finally allowed herself to fully believe that the future could be different from what she had always feared. "Maybe miracles really do exist," she whispered to herself. "They just don't happen the way we imagine." The project that began with a single prosthetic for one little girl had grown exponentially. By the third anniversary of the Institute, over 50 children and adults had received customized prosthetics, developed with the same philosophy as the original, using accessible resources, adapting existing technologies, and placing each patient's specific needs at the center of the process. Universities began taking interest in the methodology developed in Millbrook. Medical, biomedical engineering, and design students came for short internships, bringing the knowledge back to their institutions. Academic papers were published, presenting the Millbrook method as an example of frugal innovation in healthcare. Emily, growing alongside the project that changed her life, developed an early interest in science. Her school notebooks were filled with sketches of imaginary prosthetics, each one more sophisticated than the last, always colorful. "When I grow up, I want to make magic legs like Uncle Michael," she declared to anyone who would listen. One Sunday afternoon, 4 years after the first prosthetic was developed, Michael found Emily sitting on the porch of her home, now renovated thanks to the family's improved financial situation. Mrs. Martha had secured a steady job as coordinator of the family support group, and Emily's mother had returned from Chicago to live with them again. "Hey there, Doc," Emily grinned, using the nickname she'd never dropped. "Here to see my medal collection?" The girl, now 12, had discovered a surprising talent for adaptive athletics, competing in regional events for youth with disabilities. Her prosthetic, already in its 5th version, had been modified specifically for sports. "I came to bring you a surprise," Michael replied, sitting beside her. "Remember that design you drew last year? The one for special legs for ballet?" The girl's eyes widened. "You made it work?" "Not exactly how you drew it, but the basic concept, yes. And there's an inclusive dance company in Portland interested in testing it with their dancers. Emily impulsively hugged Michael with the spontaneity that defined everything she did. "I knew it would work. Adults always overcomplicate things. It's so simple." Michael laughed. It was true. Many of the best ideas implemented by the Institute had come from Emily's and other children's seemingly naive suggestions. Unburdened by the technical limitations adults carried, they imagined solutions experts would dismiss as impossible, until someone tried and discovered they weren't. The Institute eventually expanded to other cities, always maintaining its original philosophy of working with local resources and adapting to each community's specific needs. In some regions, this meant prosthetics resistant to humid environments for riverside communities. In others, ultralight devices for mountainous areas. The standardized one-size-fits-all approach typical of big medical industries gave way to a personalized, context-sensitive model. Michael often reflected on the irony of his journey. The tremor that destroyed his career as a surgeon had ended up allowing him to touch more lives than he ever could have in the operating rooms of big hospitals. The limitation that had seemed like a sentence of uselessness became the catalyst for his greatest contribution. "I think we need falls to learn how to get up in different ways," he once remarked to Jennifer, watching Emily run in a school competition. "And we need obstacles to invent new paths," she added, intertwining her fingers with his, unbothered by the tremors that, though controlled, never completely disappeared. 10 years after developing the first prosthesis, the New Pathways Institute received the national recognition that definitively validated their work, the National Award for Innovation in Public Health. At the award ceremony in Washington, D.C., Michael made sure to share the stage with his entire team, not just the professionals, but also the patients who had inspired the solutions. Emily, now a 17-year-old about to start college in biomedical engineering, was invited to speak. Standing at the podium, wearing a sophisticated version of the prosthesis that had revolutionized her life, she looked out at the audience filled with officials, doctors, and researchers. "People often ask me what it's like to live with a disability," she began. "And I always say I don't really know because I've never thought of myself as disabled. I have limitations just like everyone else. The difference is that mine are visible while many hide theirs." The young woman paused, looking directly at Michael in the front row. "What I learned from Dr. Michael and the entire Institute team wasn't just how to walk again. It was that limitations don't define destinies, that solutions emerge when someone refuses to accept impossible as a final answer, and most importantly, that our greatest strength comes not from overcoming obstacles alone, but from building paths others can follow." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the lobby after the ceremony, as he received congratulations and partnership proposals from representatives of various institutions, Michael was surprised by a familiar face, Dr. Richard, his former director at Mercy Medical Center. "Congratulations on the award," the doctor said, visibly embarrassed. "I have to admit I was wrong about your project." "Thank you," Michael replied without bitterness. The years had softened old resentments. "What matters is that we've helped many people." "Actually, I'm here for a specific reason," Richard continued, his voice quieter. "My granddaughter was diagnosed with a degenerative neuromuscular condition. The doctors say she'll eventually need assistive technology to maintain mobility." Michael felt a wave of compassion for the man who had once tried to destroy his work. "Bring her to the Institute. We'll do everything we can." "After how I acted." "Precisely because of how you acted. Everyone deserves a second chance to do things differently." The story of the doctor who developed a robotic leg for a poor girl and turned personal tragedy into a movement for social innovation reverberated far beyond the borders of Millbrook. The model created by Michael and his team was adopted in other developing countries facing similar challenges in accessing assistive technologies. Equipment that once cost tens of thousands of dollars became available for a tenth of that price without significantly compromising functionality. What was lost in technological sophistication was gained in suitability to local realities and the possibility of maintenance with available resources. For Michael, however, true success wasn't in the numbers, academic publications, or awards. It was in the smiles of children who could play again, in adults who returned to their professions, in families who saw new horizons open where only limitations had existed before. And it was especially evident in Emily, no longer the frightened girl he had met a decade earlier, but a determined young woman whose personal experience had transformed her into a powerful advocate for social innovation in healthcare. On to the Institute's 20th anniversary, a grand celebration was organized in Millbrook. Hundreds of people who had benefited from the work gathered to celebrate not just the prosthetics they had received, but the shift in mindset the project had fostered. Michael, now with graying hair and tremors that were controlled but still present, watched the crowd with a mix of pride and humility. Beside him, Jennifer squeezed his hand, silently sharing the same emotions. "We did it, didn't we?" she smiled. "We did so much more than we ever dreamed," he replied. On stage, Emily, now Dr. Emily, freshly graduated in biomedical engineering and about to take over as the Institute's research coordinator, prepared to give her speech. Her original magic leg was displayed in a glass case nearby, a reminder of the beginning of a transformative journey. 20 years ago, a doctor with shaky hands and a girl with an amputated leg met in this very town, she began. Both faced limitations the world said would define their futures. Both proved the world wrong. Michael listened, moved, recalling the path they had traveled. The sleepless nights spent trying to steady his tremors to adjust delicate components. The early frustrations, the failed prototypes, the skepticism from critics, and also the small victories. Emily's first steps with the prosthetic, the sparkle in her eyes when she ran for the first time, the dance at her 9th birthday party. "What we celebrate today isn't just technology," Emily continued. "It's proof that compassion and innovation, when they walk together, can break down barriers that seem insurmountable. It's the certainty that our limitations can be the start of our greatest contributions if we have the courage to embrace them and turn them into purpose." At the end of the ceremony, as he chatted with former patients and new collaborators, Michael was approached by a woman he hadn't seen in many years, the first administrative director of Mercy Medical Center, who had so fiercely opposed the initial project. "Dr. Michael," she said, her voice aged but still firm, "I want you to know that the greatest lesson of my career was the mistake I made in doubting your work." "No one could have predicted it would succeed," Michael replied generously. "It was a risky makeshift project." "No," she disagreed. "A competent administrator doesn't just assess risks. They also recognize the power of human determination, and I failed to see what drove you and that little girl." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of children, all wearing prosthetics developed by the Institute, who came to present flowers to the founders. Among them was a girl of about 7, with features faintly reminiscent of Emily at that age. "This is my daughter, Sophie," Emily introduced, stepping forward with a young man at her side. "She was born with a congenital malformation and uses a mini version of the technology Grandpa Michael developed for me." Michael crouched to greet the girl, admiring with technical curiosity and personal emotion the sleek, colorful prosthetic she wore. It was the 20th generation of the original magic leg, incorporating 2 decades of learning and improvements, while keeping the core philosophy of accessibility and personalization. "Do your hands shake too, Grandpa Michael?" Sophie asked, innocently, noticing the doctor's slightly trembling hands. "Yes, sweetheart," he replied with a smile. "Sometimes the things that seem to weaken us are exactly what give us our greatest strength." The little girl nodded with wisdom beyond her years, as if she perfectly understood the paradox. Perhaps she really did. Growing up in a family and community that celebrated diversity of bodies and abilities, she had learned early on that limitations were merely invitations for creativity. The celebration lasted well into the night, with performances of music, dance, and theater by people using the assistive technologies developed by the Institute. An inclusive dance group presented a contemporary interpretation of Swan Lake, with dancers wearing specially designed prosthetics that allowed for the delicate movements of classical ballet. By the end of the evening, as the last guest said their goodbyes, Michael found himself alone for a moment in the old workshop where it had all begun. The space, preserved as a small museum, held the early prototypes, the makeshift tools, and Emily's childhood drawings that had inspired many of the adopted solutions. His hands trembled more than usual, affected by emotion and the exhaustion of the long day. He observed them with affectionate familiarity. These tremors, which had once meant the end of a career, had ultimately led him to a purpose greater than he ever imagined. "You okay?" Jennifer asked, finding him lost in thought. "Just giving thanks," he replied. "To whom?" Michael smiled, looking at his shaking hands. "To life, for its strange gifts disguised as losses." Outside, the celebration continued. A new generation of professionals, trained under the Institute's philosophy, was gradually taking over the leadership of the project Michael had started. Young engineers, designers, occupational therapists, and doctors, many of whom were users of the very technologies they now helped develop. The greatest victory, Michael realized, wasn't the thousands of prosthetics produced over the years, nor the awards accumulated, nor even the revolution in assistive technology they had championed. It was the shift in mindset, the living proof that limitations, when met with creativity and collaboration, could transform into opportunities for innovation that benefited everyone. When Emily came to fetch him for the final moments of the celebration, Michael saw his former patient, now colleague, successor to his legacy, and in many ways his most important teacher, smiling with the same determination she had shown 2 decades earlier, when she had insisted on standing despite all medical advice. "You know what I sometimes think, Doc?" she asked, using the childhood nickname she'd never abandoned. "That losing my leg in that accident was the best thing that ever happened to me." "How so?" Michael frowned, surprised by the statement. "Because it led me to you, the Institute, my calling. It made me understand, early on, that our limits are just the beginning of our possibilities." Michael reflected on Emily's words as they walked back to the celebration together. It was a perspective few would grasp, finding blessings hidden in tragedies, opportunities concealed within limitations. But it was precisely this vision that had driven the Institute for 2 decades, transforming lives not just through technology, but through a new way of seeing challenges. The girl who had once dreamed of magic buttons on her robotic leg had ended up creating something even more powerful, a future where differences weren't obstacles to overcome, but traits to be celebrated and turned into strength. And the doctor, who had lost his ability to operate, had found a deeper way to heal. Not just bodies, but hopes, communities, and the very understanding of what it means to be human in a world that often mistakes worth for perfection. Together, they had proven that the greatest innovations don't necessarily come from big labs or unlimited budgets, but from the collaboration between determined people who seek solutions where others see only problems. The celebration of the 20th anniversary of the New Pathways Institute ended with a symbolic moment. Hundreds of colorful lanterns were released into the sky, each representing a life transformed by the project. As the lights rose and spread across the night horizon of Millbrook, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The magic leg that had begun as a desperate project for one child had grown into a movement that would continue long beyond its founders. Living testament that the greatest revolutions often start with a single act of refusing to accept the seemingly impossible. End of story. Dear listener, were you moved by Dr. Michael's journey and little Emily's story? Tell us in the comments what touched your heart most in this tale of perseverance. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow other soul-warming stories that remind us of the power of human determination.